Let's talk to Richard Sakwa, the professor of Russian and European politics at the University of Kent. He's also the author of Deception, Russiagate and the New Cold War. Richard, welcome. Are we seeing the beginnings of a new global confrontation here, or just a regional war?
It is a global one, but it's localized for the time being. I mean, it's global in the sense that it's a conflict between two models of world order, and that involves China and India and other countries. But obviously, specifically now, it's about European security and the failure to establish a genuine what the Russians would call indivisible order. We know that since December there's been a diplomatic process. Russia put forward some ideas of a European security guarantees. These were swept, basically ignored. So when people talk about a diplomatic process for the last few months, as far as Moscow is concerned, it didn't go anywhere at all. And this, of course, is one reason why it's taken this action.
What do you believe are Putin's key military objectives?
Well, the military objective in immediate term is to ensure the security of the so-called independent republics in the Donbass. We could have anticipated quite clearly that they'd push the border back because over the last few years, 80% of the attacks took place from Ukraine into the Donbass, where 4 million people live. I've been receiving reports all the time over these years of how they've been suffering from mortar attacks and so on. It's absolutely appalling that their concerns, as it were not taken into account by the world community, who talks about the rule of law and so on. Yet 4 million people were being held hostage in this way. But, I mean, that's obviously not to justify anything at all at the moment. The objective now, interestingly enough, is moving towards Odessa and water for the Crimea. And ultimately, the idea is some sort of regime change, whether they can achieve this or not, because obviously Ukraine has been used as some sort of battering ram against Russia for 2 decades. And Russia said basically, including, by the way, lately, talk of a nuclear-armed Ukraine, which I was surprised to see that Western powers did not immediately slap that down and said there's no question of that. If North Korea is banned, and quite rightly so, and Iran, then even talk of this should never have been allowed. And I suppose that was one of those other alarm bells that are going in Moscow in the last few weeks.
The West's efforts to influence Russia and change its behaviour with economic sanctions has so far failed. They've been tried over many years. Realistically, and we're awaiting the details of the next round of economic sanctions in the coming hours, realistically, what, if any, effect do these economic sanctions have on Russia?
These sanctions are damaging. There's no question about it. But they're not effective in terms of trying to change policy. As far as Moscow is concerned, and again, this is not to justify it, but it's simply to say, as far as they're concerned, that this is an existential question. It's 1,500-kilometer border with Ukraine. The fear that it would turn into a forward position for a hostile military alliance, say what you like. As far as it's concerned, NATO is in a bombing of Belgrade, Serbia in 1999, and so on. The concern is that, this simply couldn't be allowed. I'm not justifying any response, but simply saying that's where we were. And it's a failure of European diplomacy and constantly to talk about the threat of more and more sanctions. It's going to be awful. It's going to be terrible. And we're going to lock the division of Europe in for a generation. It was something which I've been trying to avert for decades and warning against it. And so for me, today, these events are appalling in all sorts of sense, but it was utterly predictable.
Richard, we have to stop you there. The clock is against us, but good to talk to you, and thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme, Professor Richard Sakwa.